The world is heading for a catastrophe unless climate change is prioritized.
We are on a highway to climate hell.
Record lows and now more winter weather on the way.
Obviously making life even more difficult for Erie's homeless.
Still, with overnight temperatures plummeting below zero, Winnipeg shelters are scrambling.
Some of those people are heading indoors to places like the drop-in center for shelter. Others are choosing to remain on the streets.
A perfect storm within a perfect storm.
I don't see a way out of it for a lot of people. We've got people in business who just cannot make ends meet. We've got homeless people who are in hotels that are desperately in need of food. We've got people ringing us up, old age pensioners ringing us up that have got no food.
This winter, tens of millions of British citizens, including children, will be tipped or dumped into energy poverty severe enough to risk permanent damage to their health. Cold, damp houses provide the perfect breeding ground for mold that not only causes respiratory distress, but renders houses essentially unlivable once established.
The poorest and most vulnerable people around the world are the least likely to cause the pollution leading to climate change. If you look at the greenhouse gas emissions that are heating the planet up, the richest 1% of the Earth's population are responsible for more than the poorest 50%. Yet the poor are often the most likely to be affected by its most detrimental impacts. Farmland turning into desert, sea level rises threatening homes, or extreme weather events like flash floods and wildfires.
Utility bills have soared in the UK, the home of the Industrial Revolution that lifted the world out of poverty. Now, up to half of small businesses in Britain face the risk of bankruptcy and closure. The government has had to announce a ruinously expensive energy price guarantee to mitigate the worst effects of this disaster. The rush to renewables. The mentality among the eco-extremists is as follows. If we have to doom the poor to destroy the system that made the rich, so be it. You just can't make an omelet without breaking a few eggs.
This notion of energy density is really the key to being able to reduce the impact on the planet and LNG, because you can have a smaller footprint in developing those. And when you have a smaller footprint, you're going to have, just by definition, less impact on the environment. But what I worry about on our side of the spectrum is that we only talk in dollars and cents, and we don't address this environmental piece. This is the emotional piece that everybody cares about. I want people to understand that yes, we can provide energy security. Yes, we can address issues of affordability, and we can do it in a way that is going to be the most environmentally responsible, bar none, looking at all of the other options and all of the other producers around the world. That is going to be, I think, our big communication challenge.
Well, we so madly and ineffectively rush to renewables. The International Energy Agency recently indicated that 2 decades of intense support for such undertakings has hiked the proportion of energy provided by such means from 13 to 14% to an utterly underwhelming 15.7%. If all governments deliver on their current climate policies, the world will derive no more than 28% of its energy that way by 2050, and 100% by 2207. Not 2030 or 2035, but 200 years later. Does anyone on the liberal left accept such projections? Or are they a mere fabrication of the conspiratorial right-wing conservative imagination? Okay, now we're going to extend the climate model, so to speak, into the economic model. So I just did an analysis of a paper by Deloitte, third biggest company in the US. They just produced a report in May. I wrote an article for it in the Telegraph, which I'm going to release this week. Said, well, if we get the climate problem under control, economically, because that's where the models are now being generated on the economic front. So now we have to model the environment, that's climate, and we have to model the economy, and then we have to model their joint interaction, and then we have to predict 100 years into the future, and then we have to put a dollar value on that, and then we have to claim that we can do that, which we can't, and then this is our conclusion. We're going to go through a difficult period of privation, because if we don't accept limits to growth, there's going to be a catastrophe 50 years in the future or thereabouts. And so to avert that catastrophe, we are going to make people poorer now. How much poorer?
Well, not a lot compared to how much richer they're going to be, but definitely, and they say this in their own models, definitely poorer, definitely poorer.
The Conservatives have erred tremendously, and the central Liberals as well, the middle-of-the-road Liberals, by letting the radicals take the moral upper hand on the environment front. And look at what's going to happen in Europe and around the world, likely this winter, as we put tremendous stress on poor people by jacking up energy and food prices. Is all that's going to be disastrous for the planet. In the terms that the environmentalists themselves hypothetically hold dear, the idea that we can make the planet more habitable on the environmental front by impoverishing poor people, by raising energy prices and food prices is absolutely, it's not only absurd logically, but I think it's tantamount to genocidal in its intent. It's really appalling.
It creates grave danger for those who are on fixed income going into an environment, especially in our northern climates, January, February, March, April. It's dangerous not to have reliable power, not to be able to have reliable home heating.
It means they die. And so what the Deloitte consultants are basically saying is, well, it's kind of unfortunate, but according to our models, a lot of poor people are going to have to die so that a lot more poor people don't die in the future.
People most impacted by that are the ones at the lower end of the income scale. And so if you are forcing a senior citizen to make a choice of reducing their food bill or reducing their pharmaceuticals so that they can keep their electricity and their heating on, those are not decisions that any government should be forcing their people to make. But that's the decision this is logically where the policies of those on the extreme green left have led to, is that they are now sacrificing those at the lower end of the income scale, which they put their heart on the sleeve and they say that that's who they care about. But it's just demonstrably untrue when you see the impact of it. And I'll add one more to it. The only people that I have heard talk about the plight of those who are living in countries that do not have reliable energy and the impoverishment that occurs from it are some of the energy executives that are at our global conferences. This is part of the reason why we need to get reliable natural gas around the world, because when you look at some of the most impoverished countries in the world, they're using wood and dung and coal to heat their homes.
If there were 5,000 deaths from nuclear power a year, which there aren't, the legacy press and the left-wing liberal types would be all over that like mad. But the fact that there are 40 million people or thereabouts a year who die from indoor pollution from using substandard fuels, which, by the way, are not environmentally friendly in the broader sense either, that just goes under the radar completely. And so you look at facts like that, and that's a bloody, blatant fact, that one. And it's children that are disproportionately affected on that front, too. And then you also look at the willingness of the so-called leftists who are hypothetically in favor of the poor to impoverish the poor as a consequence of their non-effective green policies. And you really have to ask, well, just what the hell is driving this? And the only answer that I can think of is that it's something fundamentally predicated on envy, and that the desire to bring down the capitalist system that produces those who are richer than the typical environmentalist, let's say, that takes precedence over everything. It takes precedence over care for the poor. It takes precedence even over hypothetical care for the planet. It's like tear the bloody capitalist system down, and it doesn't matter what or who gets destroyed in the process. And then, on the environmental side, the stats are pretty damn clear that if you can get the gross domestic product of a country up to something averaging approximately $5,000 US a year, then people start taking a long view and caring about the environment. And so it's quite obvious that if we did everything we could to eradicate absolute poverty, mostly by driving energy prices down, then we could get people off of their reliance on those primitive biofuels that poison them and poison the planet and denude the territory, and we could get them caring about the environment. And so why not do that?
It also made clear that different regions face different risks, and millions of people face poverty and food insecurity in the coming years as climate change hits crops and water supplies and threatens to disrupt trade and labour markets.
We must take bold, alternative action today to secure tomorrow.
When millions of us struggle to survive, human energy is diminished. When so many of us are still hungry, human potential is suffocated. Poverty has many forms, but no borders. To become fully human, we must free ourselves from the tyranny of poverty and from the grip of hunger everywhere. As we end poverty, true prosperity begins. As we end hunger, we all start to flourish. Your dignity is tied to every other human being on Earth. We have the ability, means, and capacity to create a world where all humans have dignity and our potential is fully realized. This is the story you are shaping.